the best Star Wars comic series of the mid-2000s. Drum roll, please. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and Star Wars Legacy. Two comic books from the mid-2000s that pushed the limits of the Star Wars timeline. These were polar opposite as far as their portrayal of what the Jedi are and the Jedi ideal, and they divided fans over which series was the best. Well, today I'm going to break it down for you, providing pros and cons for each series and describing why I think one is the real winner when it comes to Star Wars comic book primacy. Let's begin with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic takes place in the immediate timeline before the game Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. It involves characters that are going to play a role in that epic video game saga, but it's revolving primarily around Zayne Carrick, a failed Padawan who's been framed for murder by his Jedi Masters, who are certain that he is going to bring around another Sith war. On the flip side of things, we've got Star Wars Legacy. The main protagonist in this series is Cade Skywalker, burdened by the legacy of his family name. This particular Skywalker is nothing like the idealistic Luke. He is cynical, he's a drug addict, he's grim and dark, he's cool. The thing that both of these characters have in common is the fact that they're both failed Padawans. Neither one gets to complete their Jedi training, but both of them have a pivotal role to play in the future of the Star Wars galaxy. On the pro side for Zayne Carrick, he is not the clear-cut favorite in any fight. His force skills are marginal at best, and he has to rely on his wits, his determination, and his kindness to help him win the day. Legacy is following a brand new Sith Empire, a brand new Galactic Empire, a new Shattered Jedi Order, and a new Skywalker. One of the things that really makes this series compelling is the fact that it feels epic in scope. It feels like the entire galaxy is at stake with every issue that you pick up. Cade Skywalker is a very flawed but compelling character to follow along as he struggles with his own worst nature, trying to become the savior the galaxy needs, not the person that he necessarily wants to be. In this particular series, humor is a very prominent element, but it never undercuts the severity or the seriousness of the storyline. John Jackson Miller knows how to write comedy, and some of his stuff that he has in these books is real page stoppers. Just makes you want to laugh out loud, slap your knee, and continue going forward. On the flip side of that, you've got Legacy. And Star Wars Legacy is, like I said before, grim and dark. It takes itself very, very seriously. There's very little room for humor in this. In fact, I'm struggling to remember if there's any instance of a humorous event taking place in the entire series. Knights of the Old Republic is a story that ultimately revolves around hope. Zayne Carrick embodies and embraces the ideal of hope. The idea that if you just work hard enough, if you're just willing to stand up for what's right, that things will prove to be worthwhile. Another pro for the Legacy series is the world building that it does. We get to see the Star Wars galaxy at the farthest end of the future timeline. We get to see this brand new Sith Empire that connects back to the Old Republic of the prequel era. We get to see the evolution of the Galactic Alliance, which took the place of the New Republic in the New Jedi Order series. We get to see how the Yuuzhan Vong adapted to the galaxy after the conclusion of the New Jedi Order. This is tight world building. It is interesting from page to page just to see what the state of the galaxy is. Now on to the cons. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is a bit tedious at times. I said that the humor was really a strong point of it, but there were times when it did feel like it was a crutch being used by the characters. Also, Zayne Carrick, as great of a character as he doesn't quite have all the qualities of a leading man. He's never quite as dashing as you would expect from your primary protagonist. So I kind of rank him a little bit lower than Cade Skywalker on that scale. Legacy, on the other hand, takes itself way too seriously. There comes a point in Star Wars where we just have to recognize that, yes, it is just a silly fantasy with space wizards with magic swords taking on other space wizards and trying to save planets that we can barely pronounce their names. So that's a con of Legacy. Another con of Knights of the Old Republic is the art is fairly inconsistent. It changes sometimes series to series, comic to comic, with really high quality art in some sections and really poor quality art in others. That's something that Legacy of the Force did not deal with, as it had the primary creative team working together for the majority of the 50 issues of the series. A con of Legacy is also that it is not Star Wars for all ages. Knights of the Old Republic, you can give that to a Star Wars fan of any age range, and they're going to be able to understand the story, engage with it, and really have a good time with the story. But this skews very mature. Another issue that I have with Legacy is that a lot of the female characters get over-sexualized. If we take Darth Talon as an example, that is supposed to be one of the most fierce warriors in Darth Krayt's new Sith Empire, but she's not going to be getting much done wearing that kind of costume in real life. I know she's visually striking, but I think they could have gone with something a little bit more practical. It just doesn't feel Star Wars to me. Going back to cons of Knights of the Old Republic, I feel like Knights of the Old Republic could have gone on a little bit longer with the closing storyline of the Crucible. We could have experienced a little bit more of Jarell's background and how she broke away from the Crucible, seeing more of her perspective of the galaxy around her. That kind of fell flat. Also, the epilogue of the series, Knights of the Old Republic War, really felt tacked on, and while still an enjoyable story, was really not necessary for the series as a whole. The final con that I have for this is it feels really, really soap opera at times. I've never watched the show Euphoria, but this is kind of how I figure a Star Wars version of that would go. One last thing to look at before making the final ruling of which one is the superior series. Let's talk villains. In Knights of the Old Republic, the Jedi Masters that betray Zayne Carrick are actually kind of sympathetic. You see their background, you understand where they're coming from, and knowing what the threat of the Sith is really like, their efforts to try to prevent another Sith war from happening are, if not justified, they're at least understandable. With Star Wars Legacy focusing on the new Sith, this is under Darth Krayt, who is a character which has ties back to the Star Wars Republic series. And what happens is you've got this legion of Sith throughout the galaxy that are fighting to wipe out all shred of light and decency. But they feel really, really generic. They all look very similar. They've got the Darth Maul color scheme. Very few of them stand out as being interesting antagonists. So, what do we have for the best Star Wars comic series of the mid-2000s? Drum roll, please. I'm going to go with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. It was just overall a more enjoyable series for me. I liked the characters a lot better. I liked the fact that it was not necessarily galaxy-shaking storytelling, but it was very personal stories. Don't get me wrong, Star Wars Legacy is great, and the artwork is fantastic throughout. But we're getting to the saturation point with the Jedi who's dancing with the dark side at this point with Star Wars comics. We've already seen it with Quinlan Voss, which was an excellent story arc of Star Wars Republic, but we are starting to get a little bit of fatigue with that trope when we get to Cade Skywalker, and we are fed up with that as a reader by the time we get to Dawn of the Jedi. Speaking of Dawn of the Jedi, If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on the mid-2000s Star Wars comics, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.